Zoom window so that I don't see, everybody's face is blocking stuff right where. So, my name is Andy Stefik. Everybody almost universally calls me Stefik, my last name, feel free. And let me sort of welcome you to this year's sort of online EPIQ. We've run EPIQ, believe it or not, for 12 years now, which is kind of insane. And traditionally it's offline, but obviously this year we decided to do a collaborative venture with Pathfinders, which was very nice of Amrita and the Pathfinders team to include us. And we're online for probably just this last year, and then hopefully we will be moving back offline for next year. If you haven't been to EPIQ before, or this year's version with Pathfinders, there's a couple goals that we always have, and the biggest one is just we're here to kind of learn computer science together. That's sort of the big picture. That's probably not too surprising given that that's the whole purpose of Pathfinders broadly, and also of our stuff. Let me get the clock. And so there's a bunch of stuff. So we often work on how to teach computer science besides just learning it ourselves. We sort of try to get into a community of people that want to help their students learn about inventing things. And I think that over the years, that's been really amazing in the EPIQ community. There's all sorts of collaborations between Washington and Maryland and Nebraska and all sorts of places where people I know have been sharing materials and helping each other and doing joint ventures, joint classes, and all sorts of stuff. So I think the EPIQ community has been really great over the last over a decade. And part of about helping people learn to invent stuff, I think as a teacher, is learning to invent stuff yourself as well. And so part of EPIQ is really about learning some of the key things in computer science and practicing it so that you feel comfortable teaching students to invent things, because it does take practice, just like learning to play the saxophone, or learning to run, or to do athletics, or anything that takes practice. Computer science is no exception. And the community here for a long time has been part of this broader sort of movement, and they talked about it last night. If you went to the opening ceremonies, Jeff Forbes is a program officer there, and he was talking about the Computer Science for All movement and what that involves. We've been involved in that movement for a long time. And our contribution is in part trying to make tools and systems that are sort of accessible to everybody. And I know a lot of people here care about that rather deeply. So just to give a little bit of background, some of you that have come to EPIQ before have certainly heard this part before, but I know that there's some new faces as well. So EPIQ started around 2010, and it was originally a National Science Foundation project. The funding on that particular project ended in like 2012 or so, but there was a considerable number of people in the community that just wanted it to keep going anyway. So we started a non-for-profit and put together enough capital each year to kind of run the event and get people in and keep a community going. That grant also paid for what's called the Quorum programming language to be invented. So they funded a team to develop it that included me and a lot of the folks that I'll mention here in a bit. And then we developed, as part of it, quite a bit of documentation and tutorials. And it was all very primitive at the time, but it's come a long way. So where is that at now? So at the very beginning, there were 5 really brave, only blind students, just students that were blind at the time, and 2 really brave teachers that didn't have any games, didn't have any music, they didn't have any Lego stuff. It only sort of worked at all. There was really no documentation. There wasn't a website. You couldn't look anything up. You just had to kind of memorize everything, and that's pretty hard in programming. But we cared a lot about the community, and we had to start somewhere. And for whatever reason, the Washington State School for the Blind at the time kind of stuck with us before everything started broadening. Now, nowadays, things have changed a lot. So we have ballpark 100,000 users a year, so that's a lot. And 100,000, you'll note, is a lot more than even the number of blind students in the United States. Quorum is used pretty broadly across many kinds of programs. I think people have written about 485,000 Quorum programs online since June of 2017, which we started tracking, and that's going to come in very useful here a little bit later. And Quorum has pretty rich libraries, like we have all sorts of documentation. We have all sorts of like gaming stuff and all that. And we've worked really hard to keep that stuff as accessible as we possibly can, while also broadening it to all people, not just users with disabilities, but everybody, no matter who you are, blind, deaf, no known disability, learning disabilities, whatever it is. And we're working really hard to make that even better in the future as well. So the good news this year, believe it or not, because of the last month or so of funding, we have now raised over $10 million for the Quorum project. And that includes about 4 mil in development over the last 10 years. So it's come a long way. This includes, I'm pleased to say, another $3 million from the National Science Foundation that we received in the past month or so, and then likely some new funding here very soon that I can't legally announce yet. In any case, with all of this stuff comes new content, and I'll start to talk about not only what we've finished for this year that we're going to try in EPIQ now, but also kind of what we're going to be doing next year as well, as we start on these sort of new funding adventures that we have going, and all the exciting stuff we kind of have planned for all the schools that are out there that are doing cool work. So let's kind of mention who you can ask questions about and to during the event. So like I said, I'm Stefik, but there's a series of 6 steering committee members that have all worked their tails off to try to make this work this year. The first is Dania Borowski. She is at the Washington State School for the Blind. There's Art Rosino, Sina Baram, Sam Shaw, and Sarah Larkin. Unfortunately, Sarah has had a death in the family and she can't make it this week. So I'm really sorry to hear that for her. And if you know Sarah well, please be sure to send her some well wishes. So besides the steering committee that organizes everything, there's also a curriculum committee, and they've done a considerable amount of work. They always do a lot of work to try and help make the curriculum better, including designing the original version of the computer science principles content in collaboration with code.org. The chair of that currently is Amanda Rada. It also has Tim Lockwood, Ko Inamura, Jill Dunaway, Gina Fugate, and Steve Rapparelli. Just to be clear, for all those people, I really appreciate all the awesome and fantastic work all of you do, because it's a ton, and all of us know that. So. Okay, besides that, there's also our R&D team, which is my team at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I'm an associate professor there, and I invented Quorum and was a contributor to Quorum Studio. The lead software developer is William Ali. Obviously, there's lots of puns available for Prince Ali, because he's fabulous. And he is the lead dev on Quorum Studio especially, but he does especially a lot of the stuff related to games and accessibility. Tim Cluthy and Tim Rafalski combined are Tim Squared, and they are 2 PhD students in the lab, and they're both working on data science or scientific computing broadly. We have a new full-time person in the lab as well, named Gabriel Contreras. Gabriel actually did some work as an undergrad on Quorum Studio, believe it or not, and he's been doing a lot of work lately on computer science principles, and also helping with some new online stuff that we haven't announced publicly yet. Hannah Williams and Trixie are both undergraduates, both working either on computer science principles or scientific computing, and they've been helping a lot this summer as well. And both have lots of great ideas. Because I always get asked this, so how do you anything that you use while at EPIQ, you can use freely at your schools. So Quorum is under or even non-schools, Quorum is under the BSD license. If you're not familiar with BSD, it means you can use it basically for whatever you want. It is free for commercial or non-commercial use. The source code is freely available. If you want to modify it, you can even do that. And you can even put it there. The curriculum and documentation is also free under Creative Commons. This is in part because then anybody in the community can contribute to it, and anybody in the community can use it, which is kind of what we prefer to do. The only thing you can't do with the curriculum, and I'll tell you why, is you can't just slap your name on it and then sell it, right? You can't do that. And the reason for that is because some of the curriculum that we used is made by licenses that prohibit that, like code.org stuff. You know, you can't just take their content and put your name on it, but you can use it freely, which is what we do, and we have a license with them and stuff. So besides that, there's also funding for EPIQ itself. The National Science Foundation always helps fund my team to do stuff. There's 2 universities involved, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and University of Washington. The Quorum Outreach and Research Foundation is the nonprofit that runs some of the little smaller grants that we need in order to run EPIQ. Oddly enough, there's a sorority called the Delta Gamma Foundation. There's always like an avid funder, very, very kind to the community, and always funding teachers and all sorts of stuff. Prime Access Consulting is the company owned by Sina Baram, and they always help out as well. And then this year, I'm proud to say, Infosys with Pathfinders as well is part of our funding as well, and they've been really great. So. And besides that, lots of schools, individual people, various schools around the country help out as well in all sorts of ways, especially the Washington State School for the Blind, but lots of others as well. Okay, we can't be there in person this year. Oh, sweet, typo, great, lovely. But I suspect we're going to be able to run in person next year. We're still negotiating the actual location, so I can't say unless I can secretly get one of you, and I think you know who you are, to talk to your secret boss in the next week so we can set it up secretly during the event. But besides that, I suspect that we will probably be in person next year, which I'm personally very excited for. Okay, now let's start getting to the new stuff. So every year at EPIQ is different, right? So we don't do, I don't know, maybe it's just that I get bored. And so I kind of like to have something new every year. And so this year, and we always do content that we like. One of the things that we like to invent in the lab is we like to make things that are accessible to people with disabilities, but also push the envelope of what is possible to make something accessible to all people, but also still accessible to people that are blind, deaf, et cetera. And so this year, we've invented a new technology that we call 3D scene editing. And this is inspired in part by the system from Unity 3D or other commercial game engines. And it's a technology that allows you to create 3D games, but also is accessible even if you are blind. And we've worked really hard to try to make that possible. It was not an easy technology to invent, but I think that we have got a good, solid version that I think is at least, I think makes it possible. And I think it'll give us a lot of good feedback this year on how to make it even better for the next one. Besides that, we're going to have a single track this year so that everybody's sort of in the same Zoom room. I think it'll be a little bit easier. If we need to split it up, we can, but we're going to give it a shot. And we'll be doing some scene editing, accessibility, gaming stuff, general computer science, and just a teeny tiny dash of data science stuff as a taste of what there is to come in the next year. So besides that, we also every year have elections, and the elections are basically, this is a community run venue, right? Like no one person, including myself, should or even probably wants to have total control over all the details of how the venue is put together. And so we have 3-year terms that this year for the steering committee, there's 3 terms that are ending. Mine is ending, Sina Baram's is ending, and Sam Shah's. I haven't talked to everybody about who will be running for re-election this year, but nonetheless, those 3 terms are up, and we'll have a vote. That vote will be at the EPIQ Elections and Community Meeting, which is on Thursday. That one will not be recorded because we want people to be able to speak their mind and give opinions and fight to the death or whatever it is. Although I meant historically, everybody's really nice and it's fine. Run if you want and don't if you don't, and that's okay. Besides that, there are also 3-year terms ending for 4 positions on the curriculum committee, and that is Jill Dunaway, Cohen Amura, Tim Lockwood, and Amanda Rada. All 4 positions are up, including the chair. Oh, and the previous chair is actually me, so I'm up for that as well. So So if you'd like or you're interested in collaborating on curriculum or anything like that, oftentimes people on the curriculum committee end up, working with folks or doing all sorts of content. So if you're interested in that, feel free to run for a position on Thursday. Okay. Besides that, we plan to put up videos of the sessions online afterward. There's two ways this is going to happen. One is the Pathfinders people have their own system for putting up the videos, but my understanding is that we still own the videos. So we're going to be putting them up as well, and we're going to have them closed captioned. I'm not sure if the Pathfinders folks are captioning them or not. I'll have to find out about that. But in any case, we'll be captioning them and then putting those up on YouTube after so that people can see the videos. Besides that, in terms of Zoom, the general rules that I think are reasonable is if you have comments, please put them on Slack, not on Zoom. And the reason is because it keeps a record of it if we have to turn the thing off and on. Not that we need it, but it's just easier. And then second, and more importantly, Slack makes it a lot easier to send source code to each other, whereas Zoom very much so does not. It'll like eat characters and it'll get all yucky. So if you can, please use Slack or use Zoom. If you still haven't set up Slack, we have tons of support on the call that can help you get Slack up and running for the event. And it will be helpful. If everybody uses it, it'll make it easier for everybody. So just because we can all communicate from one particular approach. Besides that, on Zoom, if you want to show your camera, you can. If you don't, that's fine. Just kind of, be cool to each other. Everybody be nice and do what works for you, and that's okay. Oh, and it says on the slide to be epic, and that seems tacitly good. Besides that, for Slack, if, like I said, please use Slack for any written communication. Of course, use your microphone as you see fit. There are several channels on Slack if you're not a Slack person. If you just want to banter in general, that's totally fine. If you don't like a bunch of messages coming back and forth, you can actually mute them, and that's okay. There is an EPIQ channel. I think I've gotten everybody in it, but I'm human. So if you, for some reason, aren't seeing some of the messages, let us know and we'll make sure you get in there. And there's a support channel as well that is public, and you can do what you wish there as well. So. Okay, for logistics, like I said, EPIQ is single track. The content will be new for everyone because it uses our new 3D scene editor and Quorum Studio 3, which has a bunch of changes and improvements. For the advanced teachers that I know that have come to EPIQ for, in some cases, many years, I was talking to Amanda Rada, and she said she'd been there for 9 years, which is pretty incredible. We have cool things planned as well and new stuff related to that content. For today, our schedule is basically to do the introduction to Quorum Studio 3, which I'll do after this particular talk is done. And then we'll do hands-on with Quorum Studio 3 and then build a role-playing game, which Amanda Rada will be doing as well. There's also a lunch half hour, a virtual coffee break, and then an evening program run by Infosys. And I don't remember exactly what is in that evening program, but it looks like they've done their best to make a kind of fun, cool little activities. So if you're interested in that, feel free to pop by. Okay, so that's a lot of me sort of blabbing while everybody's cameras are off and we're all kind of just chilling in the tradition of online meetings, right? But before I kind of jump to any of the new cool stuff, any thoughts or questions or concerns or anything like that? Is everybody up on Slack? Everybody kind of good to go?
Tonight's activity is meditation and yoga for teachers.
Oh, really? Interesting.
I just looked it up.
Awesome. Okay, well then, if there's no other additional thoughts, why don't we jump right into the next one then? Because that's where I imagine, especially for those that have been here before, are probably the most interested, just because it's all the new toys, right, so to speak. I mean, I like toys, so. Okay. If you hear my son yelling the word P in the background, just accept that that's the reality of my life during online events. So, okay. All right, so let's get to the new toys. So this year we are super excited to have released Quorum Studio 3. And if you aren't familiar with sort of the last, and not everybody would be, 10 years of sort of software development, trying to make things accessible for people with disabilities. It's been a heck of an adventure. You know, a little over 10 years ago, there was certainly software that was accessible, but a lot of the major trends in computer science were going increasingly visual, right? A lot of block languages and graphics environments and stuff like that. And while it is technically possible to make those accessible, they are a huge challenge to make accessible. And so we had started around that time making an environment that we called Sodbeans, and it was effectively a plugin for an existing development environment. And it sort of was like a Band-Aid. It allowed many of the technologies to start becoming accessible, but in and of itself, like, it wasn't like an ideal solution. I don't think there are, at least not to my knowledge, if there are any schools that are still using Sodbeans, I would very, very highly recommend you do not anymore, and that you move over to Quorum Studio. It's just as free and is still a development environment, but it's where all of our development is going nowadays, and all of our new funding is in that environment as well. But nonetheless, it worked for a number of years, and so it was still got us all a start as a community. But what do we got in 3? Well, lots of cool stuff. On the screen is a picture of Quorum Studio 3, and it's got in it a graph that's up. It says chocolate interest over time. On the left-hand side, it says popularity percentage, and on the bottom, it's time periods. By the way, if you're not familiar with accessible presentations, oftentimes I audio describe the images on the screen because some of the people on the call will be blind. And so that's why I do that if you're not familiar. So inside of this, the graph is a line graph, and it has dots at strategic points where the data is. And believe it or not, we've got a version of that graph fully accessible when you generate inside of Quorum 9. And you can generate graphs. And when you generate them, it creates the images so that if you can see, you can still see it. And it also generates all sorts of information behind the scenes that is all accessible. And so if you're using a screen reader or other device, you can still connect to it, and you can get all sorts of information from it. This particular data science thing is part of a broader set of grants from the National Science Foundation that have just started, and we'll be working on these data science approaches for the next 4 years or so as we sort of develop these, add support on iPhone, add support on all sorts of devices as well. Besides that, we've got our 3D scene editing, which we'll talk about in a bit. And we developed Quorum 9. Now, Quorum 9 has 3 things in it that are sort of funny, and I'll talk about some of them in a bit, because we made some small discoveries this last year about how people are using Quorum, and we've used that to manipulate how people use Quorum effectively. The first one is a new parser technology, basically this behind-the-scene things, which I'll get to in a minute. We also added scientific notation to the language, which was really, I don't even know why it was missing, but like it was. And so because we're doing data science, we needed it because, you know, data science. And we've developed new error messages. So anytime something goes wrong in Quorum, it will tell you different things now. And these different things are dramatically different. So we'll talk about that in a bit, and the evidence for why we made that change. Because if you aren't familiar with Quorum, it's what's called an evidence-based language. We make changes based on data, not just our beliefs, right? We've also made a number of accessibility improvements. In fact, almost all of them were inspired by the students at the Maryland School for the Blind, who's told Gina, and then she sent Gina Fugate, and then she sent us an email, and we just basically implemented everything they asked for. So besides that, we also added iPhone support to Quorum Studio. So you can have a little button that goes click, click, and magically your phone is an iPhone application now. And we added a bunch of data science libraries as well. So let's break some of these down. So historically, any kind of programming language, you know, computer science is based around inventing things. And you do that inside of a programming language always, right? Like that's the way it works. If you actually work at Microsoft, you type text into a text editor and that text turns into code, right? But the question is, what happens when you screw it up? Well, it turns out over the last couple of years, there's been a number of academic papers that have been investigating what computer programs tell you when you screw something up. And it turns out computer scientists have done a, epically terrible job at explaining to users what they screwed up. And when I say computer scientists, I am not excluding myself, because it turned out that when we did a good hard look, we were making exactly the same mistakes as anybody else. So we decided this year to do a little digging. And we discovered, it turns out, all of you have been using that online editor. And it turns out, as you've been using it, we behind the scenes track everything because we have to, because it has to store it on a server in order to send it back to you. And we made a discovery. It turns out that all of you, meaning your students, anybody that's online, and we don't know exactly who is using Quorum Online, it turns out the compiler errors that you have follow the little equation at the bottom of this slide. Notably, and I'm just going to read it just so you know, alpha times e to the beta over x times x plus theta. Now, the details of what those little equations are not super important, but what it means is the types of errors that you have follow exponential decline, meaning you get some errors much more commonly than others, and you can exploit that information to try to make it easier for people to use Quorum. Okay, so a couple caveats. We don't know exactly who's using Quorum Online. We don't know any demographics, like we don't track anything about you as individuals, because, you know, why would we? And we do that because of privacy, right? Like we don't want to, you know, have your students have their names out there and stuff like that. We just want to know trends, right? But despite that, even though it's across all demographics, all people, we still see this remarkably reliable trend, so reliable that we can just straight up derive an equation for it, and it works pretty dang well. Okay, now what does this mean in practice? What it means in practice is that now there's a graph on the screen, and this graph shows the exponential decline for categories of compiler errors. Notably, it says percentage of errors by error code and group. And on the left-hand side, it says percentage of errors. And you see on this, there's blue and red bar charts. The blue is for all errors that the system gives you, and the red one is the first error that you get on top of the file. And there are 4 categories of errors that are highlighted, and they're highlighted for good reason, called lexer no viable alternative, parser no viable alternative, other, and input mismatch. And I promise you, I will get to the point really quickly. I just want you to understand a little bit about the evidence behind what we're thinking of when we're making this change. And in these 4 categories, it turns out these errors in these categories were generated by a tool behind the scenes that Quorum was using that caused the errors to look all funny. And so we figured out, or I figured out, a way to replace it, and it gives us better errors, or at least it gives us errors that we're experimenting with to try to make them better. And so on the slide, it says that with an asterisk, what else would Stefik do during a pandemic? And you can see on the screen, there's a file and there's a semicolon somewhere in it. And the error message now is the symbol semicolon is not valid, please remove it. And it's very literal, right? Okay, so let's look at a couple examples. In the previous version of Quorum, in Quorum 8, if you had a particular error in the scene, you were missing a right parentheses, it would say no viable alternative at input set path scene.qs load scene, something like that. Nowadays, it'll say expected right paren. A call to an action is a name followed by blah, some extra stuff, left paren, expressions, and right paren. And then it says more info at, and then it gives you a URL. And this is the actual message. It tells you what character you were missing. It tells you why you were missing it, because it's a call to an action that it expected. And it gives you a source where you can go look up more information about what it is that you were doing. We don't know for sure that that's better, but it feels like it's probably better. And we will be evaluating this from the data that we gather online as these things go live on the website. Let's take one more example. We noticed that some of these errors on the previous slides, one of these categories, I forget which one it was. I think it was in other, oddly. Were actually just people misspelling things. And one of the most common was when you had a keyword like output or say in Quorum, people would have the capital O or a capital S. So previously, if you had that, it would say no viable alternative at input output hello. And now what it says is possible spelling error in output. Did you mean output hello with a lowercase o instead of output hello with an uppercase o? And so I don't know for sure that we've nailed it all. I don't know for sure that these error messages are better, but we've done a couple of things. One is we've had them evaluated by people external, and they've looked at the errors and given us feedback on them. And the second thing is that we tried was we ran all of the error messages in the entire language through a Flesch-Kincaid metric, and we've lowered them all to 8th grade reading level. The reason we chose 8th grade is because we tried to get them lower than 8th grade, but the error messages were straight up wrong. Like we couldn't remove enough words to make them 6th grade level without them being actually incorrect. So we settled on 8th grade reading level for all the error messages, and we tried to make them as literal as possible, like do this, do that. In any case, we have a lot more control over these things now. And as EPIQ is going, I'm really, really curious to know what you all think about these messages and what you think we should do to change them and make them better for the next iteration of all the tools as well. Okay, so that's maybe a boring topic, error messages, but I think it'll actually make a difference for students, or at least I hope it will. But besides that, I imagine what many of the features that people are interested in today are actually the new scene editors and stuff like that, which is what we're going to focus on this week. So on the screen is a picture of the new project window, which has in it now a tree, and in that tree is general, graphics, scenes, Lego, and others. And inside of the scenes tree, there's blank scene, which is the old 2D system, and there's 3D scene, which is the new 3D system that we have for scenes. Now, technically, either one will work. They're all the same scene files, but nonetheless, this puts in some templates for you so that you can do some cool stuff sort of out of the box, if you will. And just like last year, there's a palette, a grid, a properties window, and there's even now a 3D palette for you to adjust things. And on the screen, there is a picture, and on that picture is a orange spaceship and a gray spaceship, a properties window that tells you where that spaceship lives in 3D space, and also lets you set properties on it like physics and movability, mass, friction, restitution, and stuff like that. Besides that, on the left in the palette, there's a series of spaceships that you can put into the environment and move around and change the camera and stuff like that. And all of this is accessible with a screen reader. But I will say, I actually don't know of another technology, not really, where they've actually made 3D accessible, even if you can't see. And so it is a bit of an experiment. So I'm sure that people have feedback, and that's okay too. Besides the actual 3D editor, you can also create a 3D game without writing any code. You can run 3D scenes natively in Quorum Studio, and it takes no code. So on the screen is the same spaceship. And if you click the run button, it will pull up the game in a smaller window because that's the default. And that smaller window has the same spaceship in it, and that same spaceship is running in your program. Now, I will say that when you run a game from the static editor, that doesn't mean your game does anything, because this is an editor to set up the scene, not to actually make it playable. But that's kind of what we do at EPIQ, is we learn how to code that stuff. Okay, so in terms of Quorum 9, besides this, we've also, besides the 3D scene support, we've got the accessible charts and graph stuff, and that will be the focus entirely of EPIQ 2022, in which the NSF just funded us another $3 million to work on that. In part because, you know, it's such a big problem. You want students to be able to become data scientists, and if they're not accessible, that's a huge barrier. Besides that, in terms of accessibility, we added a number of features that have been requested by the community, but especially the students in Maryland, as I mentioned. Well, the first is menu mnemonics. So we've added a series of mnemonics so that you can type extra keys and go quickly through the menus. We added first letter navigation support through the trees and type ahead support, which is basically, if you're not familiar with what that is, it's kind of like as you're typing, it will jump to different places in a tree to try to get you there faster. We've also refactored, although this isn't like a feature necessarily that people will be interested in, we've refactored our accessibility system for future multi-platform support, because we've started work on other platforms, especially the web and iOS. So that's will take a while in order to build those things, but nonetheless, we've got a start on it. Besides that, for many of you, I know that you've wanted iPhone support, and we have completed that now. In order to do it, you must be on a Mac, because that's a legal thing with Apple, to my knowledge. And on iOS, you basically go to the run menu, and then you say send to iOS. And then if you've got a little game program, then you're good to go. It'll send it to your iPhone. Besides that, this iOS thing right now, I would say, although it's functional, it's kind of like a fancy beta in a lot of ways, is what I would say. Like it works, but it's not perfect. It has some more work to do. But this was also, as part of our data science programs, was expanded to by the National Science Foundation as part of these grants. So we will be building on our foundation of iOS over the next few years to try to make better iOS support, which I know the community cares about because it's kind of cool, and also it's just really practical, especially for the blind community because they use those devices so heavily, but really for anybody because iOS devices are awesome. So. Okay, now for data science today, although we have funding for the next 4 years to work on this, the basics of what we have now, we have support for many basic chart types. This includes histograms, scatter plots, bar charts, and line charts. And those are all accessible now. I think they need more work, but they're accessible. We have support for much of the statistics that are commonly taught in Common Core that you would get through like AP statistics or stuff like that. And that includes many common statistical tests that you would need and that are taught in the classroom and stuff like that. And as I said, this was recently funded to be expanded greatly. Okay, so the last thing I always like to mention is kind of like where it's going. And I mention this because in our community meeting, these things are always up for discussion. Although we like to make our own decisions about what we end up writing or developing, we also think that like it's important to work with the community and try to decide what is possible and what would actually be fun to do. And so this last slide for the Quorum Studio is actually our Quorum Studio 4 slide for the roadmap. Normally, when I show these roadmaps, it's always a little bit speculative because we can't know the future. We can't know like what roadblocks we'll run into, what kind of funding will pop up, which grants will win and lose. It's really hard to predict sometimes. But our goal this year, because of recent funding, is a couple-fold. Number one is we spent the last week doing a hackathon on our multi-platform support for accessibility. And I'm really, really pleased to state that we think by December, although it might be a little later than that, we are going to have a very significant update to the Quorum website. And this update will include full support of much of Quorum 9, including the accessible graphics technology. So what that means is, in theory, you should be able to connect to any user interfaces that you develop will now work online. Any graphics applications will now work and be accessible online. Any of the data science content will work and be online, and it's all being made accessible in the browser as it stands. The real goal here is we know that many schools end up using devices like Chromebooks, and we want everything to be accessible on Chromebooks so that things are as useful as we can be for inside the classroom, because we know not everybody has access to a Windows machine at their schools. Besides that, we're going to be working on a new technology, which, sorry, this is Stefik's dumb dream. In my head, and maybe this is a really dumb idea, I don't know. In my head, I think it might be possible to create a technology that would allow a blind child to become a visual effects engineer for movies. And maybe that sounds really dumb, and it probably is, I don't know. But in order to do it, the only way I've been able to figure it out is to invent a technology that builds upon something called graphics shaders. And so it's a little bit speculative, but has some benefits longitudinally for the language in terms of trying to get stuff even more accessible for even more absurdly inaccessible things than already having 3D graphics programming accessible. And so we're going to actually take a slight divergence and do graphics shaders this coming semester, which will probably be done by December, although we're not sure yet. Now, part of the reasoning there, once we have graphics shaders, that will allow you to do stuff like you have a box and it lights on fire, or like you have fog effects or steam or shadows and stuff, and you'll be able to, control them in such a way that we can make them accessible. And that is going to lead to a new version of Quorum, which will also use blocks. Many of you have asked for this feature over the last few years, blocks, and we've been waiting to try to get it funded by the National Science Foundation, and I'm pleased to announce that we finally have. And so we will be adding in the current grants that we have a version, at least in Quorum Studio, that will add block support to the environment. We're hoping to get a prototype done by next summer, although we don't know exactly you know, how that development will go. But nonetheless, we think it's at least plausible that we'll be able to get something by the summer or shortly after there. So either Quorum Studio 4 or 5 at the latest is what we would expect. We're hoping to get some significant improvements to our iPhone support by next year as well. And we're hoping to get all the data science stuff accessible on the web by next summer as well. I think it's probably pretty close even now, but you know, oftentimes it's good to sort of wait a bit and kind of polish things up as much as you can. So, okay, so that's a tremendous amount of me talking, which is probably never good. So I hope that that's at least interesting for some of you in the community, and that gives you kind of a sense or a flair of like what's going on and what we're working on and where we're kind of going for this year and next. But my assumption is that what we really want to do is like actually go break stuff. So I think that's what we'll do next. But before we do, are there any like questions or comments or concerns or anything before we move on?
Hi, Stefik. Yeah, this is Jafar. I want to, because there is one thing that concerns me, and is that okay, you have image templates in Quorum, say for 2D and 3D, right? So is there a way for us to, because sometimes I want to put my own images that I find on the internet, and I want to use those. And I know that Quorum has labeled everything with a JSON file.
Yep.
So
I think what you're going to ask is, can I change that palette?
Yeah. Can I do my own one? I mean, can I do?
You sure can, and I'm going to link it in the general chat right now, the tutorial on how to do that. You can do it both for the 2D system and for the 3D system. So you can add your own 3D models in, and you can add in your own 2D images as well.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to tell you is every time when Quorum Studio opens, right, it opens on your default project. So actually, I'm wondering if by default you can make Quorum not open any project, so that you can just open your own or create your own.
Do you mean that it retains knowledge of the project?
Yes, it retains knowledge on your previous project. That's right.
And you'd prefer that it doesn't retain that?
Yeah, I prefer that it doesn't. Yeah, I prefer that it doesn't, so that I can just start fresh.
I think, William, are you on the call?
Yep, I'm right here.
Could you mark that down as a user request?
Sure, I can do that.
You know how to do it. You just close your programs.
Yeah, that is what you do. You close them, yeah. But it's possible we could add a flag or something that says never retain or something like that. So I don't think it's that hard.
Yeah, when I close the program, when I reopen it, it opens again on my previous project, which I prefer not, Quorum Studio not to.
Weird. Yeah, I don't know, when you close it, it shouldn't reopen it next time unless like it crashed or something. But like
Jafar, you have to close each project. If you menu on the project, right click if you're using a mouse, you can close a project before you close the program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know. But no, I'm just wondering if it is just possible by default to just have it launch a blank file or blank.
Yeah, there's no setting for that right now, but that wouldn't be like rocket science to add. So if it's something you care about, we'll write it down and we'll see if you can't do it.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah.
Do it.
A few things. One, is it possible to?
You have me worried, Pranav. Go ahead.
To get intuition about large data sets. So let's say I have 5 or 6 variables, like in candlestick charts.
Mm-hmm.
And if I want to see those, understand, just get a feel of the data, is that something that's possible right now?
How large is large?
You're talking about 3 to 4 years of daily stock data. So I think I got an 11 MB CSV file, which I want to load.
Oh, 11 megs, is that what you said?
Yep.
Yeah, 11 megs is fine. You're good. I think the most I've tested up to right now is 100 megs, and that is loaded in a second or two, so it's not been so bad. So I think that I benchmarked this recently because I knew not just you, but I knew other people would ask. In fact, somebody from Germany messaged me and was like, dude, Stefik, this is too slow on this 300 meg file I have. I'm like, cool, thanks. Anyway, yeah, but so if I recall correctly, I think we're like 30% slower than R or something like that. So like it's a smidge slower than the industry standard, but not much. And so it's like 100 megs, I think, loads in a second or two. So I think it's not.
Yeah,
so
but that's fine. But I'm saying I'm not sure exactly how the graph accessibility is working, but can I visualize two variables at once, 2 or 3 variables on a y-axis at once? So let's say I have date, open, close, high price, and I just want to get a feel of those variables.
Yeah.
Is that something possible?
Tim Cluthy, are you on the call? Maybe you are, maybe you're not. I'm not sure. I think that we just added that, didn't we?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we've got that.
Yeah. We just had, I don't think we have candlestick charts, but we do have, does that work for the box plots and stuff like that too? Do you remember?
That would work for bar charts. And
Bar charts.
We don't have candlestick yet.
Yeah, we don't have candlestick. We haven't finished that. And I think that we haven't finished the grouping characteristics for the box plots yet, right?
No, not yet.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. So the short answer, Pranav, is yes, but not for every chart type. So in the chart types that we support, the grouping operations, you can basically declare which factors that you have. So you can say like, this is one of my factors, and that will automatically generate the graphics for you in the appropriate way. So.
Okay, and what about Android support? I know you had it. I know this work on iOS. What about Android and Linux? I think Linux was just a font thing, if I remember, last EPIQ.
People have requested Linux in the past, but not that many, so we haven't worked on it. We don't have any funding to work on it, crucially. Android support, we do still have, nothing has changed in it. So it should still work just fine. We haven't had any issues with it. I think most of our new dev is probably going toward iOS, but my understanding is we plan to maintain the Android stack as well. So I don't think we're going to be doing as heavy development in it, just because the community that we often collaborate with. But yeah, we still have it. There's you still run it the same way, like send to Android or something like that, and then it goes from there. So yeah.